Good morning. Welcome to Points of View on Teachers Talk Radio. We have myself, Ray, Rachel, and JP this morning, and we are going to start with a topic that's been in the news for a while and keeps being in the news. There keep being reports about it. More and more young children are arriving in school not able to use the toilets. And if we have time after what I'm sure will be a lengthy frustration-filled discussion, then we will also be looking at some recent decisions around what students do or do not have to memorize for their GCSEs. So let's start out with our first topic. We've heard, I mean, none of us are primary teachers. Let's just start there. Yes, we don't teach primary. But we're seeing more and more reports in the news, more chat on social media, and more personal stories from friends and family that we have who are primary teachers who are saying the numbers of students who are arriving not potty trained is continuing to grow. I feel like every time I hear about this, it's a slightly larger number. And as a consequence of that, of teachers having to take on the role of potty training in addition to everything else that they have to do, schools are having to hire more staff. Teachers are spending literally hours every day on toileting needs. That was not the case previously. It's having huge knock-on effects on things like staffing and time to actually teach or support the entire class. So why don't we start with you, JP, since you're the only one of us who's actually a parent, and you can share your thoughts from what is probably the most relevant point of view to this particular discussion.
Yeah, I mean, look, been through potty training kids myself. Look, I think it's a wider issue. It's not just about potty training. It's about parental responsibility. Same goes for reading. I mean, I'm the primary educator. Please, thank you. Yes, no, knife and fork, manners, flushing a toilet, closing a door, keeping the heat in, doing the dishes, cleaning, cooking. All these things are what I encourage my own children to do. They're skills that I pass on to them. Oracy skills, debating skills, discussion skills, taking them to museums. I'm the primary educator. Myself and my wife are the primary educators. It's our job to raise our children. It's not outsourcing it to somebody else and saying, here, you do this for us. Now, I understand there are some parents who struggle. There's two-income households, different to my generation, my parents. And people struggle. That's correct. I understand that. But there's absolutely no excuse for not teaching your children the basics. And there's no more basic than making sure your child is toilet trained. Passing it on to somebody else, I think, is indicative to a culture of a lack of shame, a lack of pride, a lack of responsibility, and a lack, I think, of understanding culturally that generations ago would have absolutely shunned that. They would have been humiliated. And I don't think coming across different subgroups within society, that would have been absolutely frowned upon. You wouldn't have dared taking your child to school and said, sorry, my child's not potty trained. And in those rare exceptions, of course, that those children have, say, certain needs, that's understandable. But this isn't those children. This is going mainstream. This is becoming more of a normal thing. And the sense of righteousness entitlement, my some parents have, like, they think they pay the money to a service and hand the children over. And maybe I think the problem is nursery, because nursery are brilliant and they are fantastic, and you pay a lot of money for nursery. So maybe what some parents are realizing is, okay, well, maybe, you know, the nursery did all this for us, the school's going to do all this for us. And I think maybe there's that lack of understanding of what actually the institution of school is, because the government and many successive ministers have mission creeped schools to now be practically everything: wraparound care, social care, family care. And then there, when the school pushes back and says, no, you can't take your child on a holiday, for instance, really sorry about that, then you get the kind of customer service. Can I call your manager, please? And that's what's happening now in education, is that we aren't allowed to operate in a way and simply turn around to us as a parent and say, sorry, but, you know, until your child is potty trained, we will not be accepting that child. And I think that's where they have us, because what teacher wouldn't do that? We are altruistic. We want to help these children. And for the children, sometimes that means we're changing other children's, other children's nappies. I, as a parent myself, I can tell you, I would be absolutely ashamed if I sent my child to school at 4 and 5 years old and they weren't potty trained.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I heard about this topic, I asked a couple of people within my circle. So my mum was a health visitor for years. My friend is a child psychologist, and I sort of said, well, what's going on here? And my mum said, well, when you went to school, well, I'm 46, you weren't allowed to start primary school if you weren't toilet trained back in the day. And I absolutely agree with what you're saying, is that it's just another job to add to the list of jobs. And also, I absolutely agree with all of the things that you're saying about parents having a responsibility with not only toilet training, but the social interactions and reading. You know, you should be able to start those things at home first. But the toilet training, I think, is something very shocking to me, because I wasn't particularly aware of how much of a problem it was, obviously not being a primary school teacher. But yeah, it just seems ludicrous that children are 4 or 5 years old and are not able to indicate and say when they need to go to the toilet. My mum has theories about it, that it's become easier because of these interim pull-up pants and things like that, for kids not to indicate that they need to go, and for parents to let it go. And also this added screen time, which means that kids aren't communicating as well, and parents aren't interacting as well with their children, which means that they're not reading the signals or praising the signals when they get them. So I think there's a bigger issue, as you say. It's not just the toilet training.
Yeah. I feel like there's in term that all seems so basic and so obvious and so simple, but then on the internet, which is a horrible, awful place, you have a lot of people trying to link the increase in numbers of students who are not, I say students, these are like 5-year-olds, but as a secondary teacher, it seems so weird to me to be talking about like 4 or 5-year-olds as students. Like they're children. What are they studying? These kids, as of not being toilet trained, that people are trying to make a link between that and then the increased number of SEND children, young people, students who are appearing in schools. And I feel like that's a false equivalence. Like it's a correlation rather than anything else, because you can't. The same people that are trying to say that are the same people who are saying things like, oh, there's not actually an increase in SEND, there's just an increase in accuracy of diagnosis, or we're becoming more aware of neurodivergence and disability, and the same amount of people they're just getting diagnosed better. But we know that that's not, none of that makes sense, because if that's true, we're getting better at diagnosing it, but those same students, that same number of students who were being toilet trained just fine 15, 20 years ago, are now somehow not being toilet trained. And like, autism didn't magically change around 2010, 2005. Like the same, just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean you should be presenting any differently. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it just doesn't match up. I don't think the fact that there's an increase in the number of students getting a diagnosis or students having SEND, I don't think that has anything to do with the toilet training problem, because it just logically doesn't follow. So there's something else going on. And so then we have to be looking at societal issues. And I think I come back to the same 3 things I always come back to in the past 5 years especially, but 10 years for sure. And that's COVID most recently. Technology, as we've mentioned, with screen time, and of course, parents. And everybody knows this, except some people are just unwilling to admit it.
Well, you're right, because anthropologically speaking, the human brain is pretty much where it was a couple of thousand years ago. And I'm sure that the Egyptians were potty trained before they sent their children to school. I'm sure the Romans were potty trained. I'm sure that the Vikings were potty trained. Actually, the Romans were well potty trained because they had brilliant toilet manners, sewer systems and everything else, and cultural norms. And it comes back to that, doesn't it? This idea of all of a sudden our precious children aren't capable of this is actually really upsetting, because when you look at the developmental brain of a child, this is how they learn language very quickly. The human brain is designed to rapidly learn in its earliest years. And what worries me is that they are not taking even the basics of toilet training. When you talk about language communication, you talk about developmental sort of psychology, it is massive, and you don't get those early years back. Anybody can tell you about trauma-informed practice, can tell you that the early years of a child are extremely important. And after that, you're playing catch up. And that means that the child isn't nurtured, that the child doesn't have time, the child isn't given time because the parents are busy on their phones or too busy doing everything for them. There's a selfishness about society now where children are almost hived off and given to grandparents even sometimes. Now, I appreciate and understand that we are living in two income households. I appreciate that the world we're living in is very busy. But let's be clear, the most important thing when you are a parent is your children. And the most important thing in the world and the universe is children. And the very same parents are probably taking photographs of their children on Instagram, posts and all the rest of it, and dressing them up in designer clothes and all the rest of it. But when you actually scratch beneath the surface, are they doing those things which we really need them to do? And that is to instruct their children, teach their children the basics, I would say. Please, thank you. Language, manners. I mean, that's my sound old school and traditional, but those are the things that build the foundations of which then when we come in and have those children in school, they back us up. We're not the primary. We should not be the first person to turn around and says to a child, here's a fork, here's how they sit down at the table. We shouldn't be the first person to say, here's a potty, here's how you poo. I mean, we should not be doing that because that should be done by the people who are ultimately responsible. And when you have the rise of the kind of culture of criticism and lack of support that we get, it's almost like we're doing more. And the more you do, it's interesting that people think there's a trap there. And same goes for the children. The more you do for people, the less they do. And sometimes being a good teacher is turning around and saying, I'm really, really sorry, but I'm not helping you. Do you know why I'm not helping you? Because you're going to have to learn to help yourself. And the whole purpose of education is to basically teach people to teach themselves. And that's the thing is we don't, a parent doesn't potty train a child. It helps create the environment of which a child can learn to potty train itself. Same as riding a bike. I don't teach my children how to ride a bike. I facilitate that. They are the ones that ride the bike, but I spend the time with them. I invest in them. And then in turn, they then learn. And the problem is that people think that learning can be outsourced now, or that learning isn't their responsibility, or it's somebody else's responsibility. And governments have pandered to this. They haven't held the line. They haven't said, I'm really, really sorry. As you were saying, Rachel, these are the responsibilities of parents. These are the responsibilities. If our children were dogs and they were, for instance, pooing on the street, we have more shame about dogs pooing on the street than we have children not being potty trained. And yet we fine people for pooing children. Now, I'm not saying, children just, go for a poo in the street. But if we have a society which basically judges people that, you poop up, your responsible dog owner will live to poop afterwards. And we have created a culture now, if somebody doesn't, they get it, don't they? We all know that. But it's interesting that we train our dogs to go to the toilet. But when it comes to our children, it's almost like, yeah, it's fine. Just give them all that freedom. And it comes back to that style of parenting these days of like, whatever goes, and it's relaxed. I'm their mates. Or I've got this designer child, but, they're not potty trained. I mean, honest to goodness, I go back to it. If I turn around to my friends at 5 years, my children were 4 and 5 years old, and they weren't potty trained, I would be hiding that fact. I would be ashamed. I would feel, as a parent myself, I've done something wrong there. Or I would investigate. Now, I understand there is going to be those who are going to get triggered and they'll get on their social media high horses and they'll go on and condemn me. Well, you know what? You go start changing other people's nappies in school. You go start showing a child at 14 how to use a knife and fork and then say to me that is my job. You give me a clear division of what my job is, because I feel sometimes I'm doing more parenting at teenagers than the actual parents. Now, I don't know whether that's my job any longer. If that is my job, that's fine. Then give me a pay rise, and maybe give me more time, and maybe turn me into a surrogate parent. Or maybe, you know what? Why don't schools just adopt some of the children because they're practically going with anything else?
Yeah. I mean, they'd probably be better off. It's that it's meet them where they are gone too far, because we shouldn't have to. Parents shouldn't be setting their kids up and repeatedly failing them and just for us to keep stooping lower and lower and lower and lower. That should not be an option. At some point, when we recognize what the wider problem is, and it shouldn't be a school's responsibility, governments need to step up. Society in general needs to step up and actually address this. Yes, there are certain approaches that we know work that don't anymore. Centers have been closed. There were resources available for parents that aren't there anymore. But also, like, and this is impossible, right? Unless I'm like made queen of the universe and can decide who can and cannot have kids. But it just needs to be communicated to people better what is involved in being a parent before they have children. And like, I have done my damnedest to get this through in the PSHE lessons that I've taught and teaching in general. But there needs to be some sort of, like, I was thinking the other day about all the kind of public service announcements and like educational campaigns that the specifically Canadian government, because I lived there till I was 9, ran when I was small. I remember seeing all these kind of health commercials, like these cartoon things aimed at kids, like educating them on like stranger danger and not keeping the water running, and don't tell anyone you're home alone when you answer the phone. Like, all these kinds of things were ubiquitous when I was a kid, and they were government funded or provincially funded. I don't know, whichever it was. And I just feel like, does that still happen? Am I just missing it because I don't have kids, I'm not a primary teacher, and I'm not watching this stuff? But I feel like that approach to kind of social community parenting or educating kids and parents has faded out slightly. Like, it definitely has in Canada from everything I've heard people are saying. And I just wonder about here, because you have all these parents having these kids who just have no actual concept of, like, you have to feed them, you have to clothe them, you have to keep them alive, you have to take them to the doctor, but you also have to do things like teach them how to use the freaking toilet, read books to them. Like, these things are just as important as doing the absolute bare minimum to keep them breathing. And people just don't, they're happy to outsource that kind of thing. Teach them how to emotionally regulate rather than shouting at them. Like, where's the education for people who, let's be reasonable, should not probably be having children right now, who are having kids with no support? Like, there just needs to be more investment in helping people to be better parents, because if they didn't have those role models growing up, how the hell else are they supposed to know? They don't.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a school's problem. Like,
Let's
we need...
Sorry, I'll come to you a second, Rachel. We're just going to remember we've got excellent sponsors. So we're sponsored obviously by Hatchet Learning, and it's a partnership that we have with them. They're publishers of professional development books. Should you have the need for professional development, because we teachers always have the professional development, because we're constantly evolving and having to evolve ourselves, because we're learners. And if you want professional development, they've got great resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world, because we do have a following from Teachers Talk Radio around the world. We even have here, we've got Canadian British, we've got Irish, we've got people from all around the world who involve themselves in Teachers Talk Radio. I think we're the only kind of radio that is dedicated towards teachers, and that will help level up your professional development. So today you can visit hatchetlearning.com, it's all one word, to explore the full range of titles. And of course, now we have Teachers Talk Connect next week, which is the annual gathering of the great and the good in education. Anybody who's got sort of any input in education, any sort of I suppose specialisms, it's brilliant. It's a good social day out as well. It's good CPD in itself. It's free. It's in Manchester, and of course we've got that, and that is get yourself to get tickets for that. And as I say, where do you get free CPD of the quality where you can have such the hive minds in the room? I mean, when you actually look at the individuals there and the skills that they have, the academic background they have, and even some of the ideas they bring to the party. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about teaching, is that you can learn so much from others, and you never think you've got it fixed. So there's that. That's next Saturday in Manchester, and that's our Teachers Talk Connect. Of course, then we are sponsored by AQA, which are an examination board, and at AQA, one of the top examination boards in the country. They're experts. Of course, they do lots of CPD and lots of outreach to help your course and the children. They work closely with teachers, combining expertise to create tools and training, the guidance that genuinely makes a difference. They're the most chosen academic assessment body in the country. And as we head into the season of exams, Oh yeah, we're getting close to that, aren't we? Any help that you can get towards the students and yourself is more than welcome. So AQA are there to help. If you want to find out more, then go on to AQA, and they've got plenty of resources there to help as well. So Rachel, sorry,
No
you were.
problem. Yeah, I was just going to say in response, Ray, to what you were saying, there is a lot less out there, I think, in terms of the government giving distinct guidelines to parents and to children about what is and isn't acceptable behaviour and what a parent's job is supposed to be. Probably because there are people out there who just go, oh, we're living in a nanny state, we're being told how to parent our children. But unfortunately, I think the proof is in the pudding. If
You
children
need
are
to be
turning,
told.
yeah, if children are turning up to school and 40% of them aren't toilet trained, that's a problem. There's an issue, and people do need to be told. And I think that this stems into so many other issues. When we talk about behaviour going downhill in classrooms, then this is also something I think that begins at home. If at home there isn't a role model or a parent who can parent their child and set boundaries and instigate sanctions and things like that, then they come to school, and why the hell would they respect the adult standing at the front of the room who essentially they don't really know and they don't have a relationship with? And I think that goes across so many other things. I remember being in a parents' evening one night, and the parent was saying to me, oh, he won't revise, he won't do his homework, he's on his Xbox. And I'm like, take the Xbox away. And they were like, how can we do that? How do we do that? And you're like, you take it away. You turn off the internet, you take the Xbox away. I can't do it for you. You need to do it yourself. That's part and parcel of being a parent, is instigating what your lines or rules in the sand are. At school we have no chance. Teaching to a large degree sometimes feels like a game of call my bluff. I'm going to threaten you, and really all I can do is phone home or potentially put you into some kind of behavior policy, but I can't really do that much to you. It needs to be backed up by parents at home, and that goes with all of these things. And I absolutely agree that there's been a downward spiral in very basic human social interactions in terms of what's acceptable and unacceptable behavior. I know my mum was a single parent for a long time, and she still was teaching us manners, being polite, respecting adults, and obviously toilet training and things like that. So I just think that it has to go back to parents, and I think the government needs to be harder line in terms of saying to them what you need to do, your responsibilities.
I think adding
and
that,
sorry.
right, go ahead, go ahead, you go.
Okay. No, I was going to say, because I'm sure we've all had very different family experiences, but again, it's generational. Like a generation ago, it didn't matter if you were a single parent. It didn't matter how much money you had in the bank or not. It didn't matter any of that stuff. This stuff was still getting done. Like your mom was a single parent for a while. I always had two parents at home until I went to university. My mother, she was the eldest of 5 children. So obviously being the firstborn and a daughter, she did a lot of that stuff with her siblings growing up, such as the curse, right? So she's always been brilliant with kids. But she, like, as an example, okay, so yeah, she toilet trained me at school. She taught me to read before I ever went to school. And this is she's very intelligent, but she did not like school. It was not her thing. She didn't like academics. She didn't feel particularly good at them. She struggled. She got out of high school and said, I'm never doing anything like that again. And she didn't, right? She's never been an academic person, and she'll be the first person to admit that, despite being very clever. So despite her childhood, teenage experiences, not liking the school environment, having difficulty with her teachers, just really disliking that type of thing, right? She did not like school. Never once, like, she's very honest about that when I asked, but never once do I remember her ever poisoning my mind against education or against school based on her own negative educational experiences. She never did that. She never lied about it. She never sugarcoated things, but it was always in terms of me and my experiences, but everyone's different. You blah, 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 your father, blah, 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 blah. Like, it didn't require any sort of dishonesty on her part. It just required her not to prejudice me against education. And somehow my mother, who hated school, managed to do that okay. So why do we have all of these parents Well, I didn't like school. I never liked school. I never got any GCSEs. Yeah, babes, we know, we can tell. Why do all these parents take their negative experiences and poison their children with it? Like, you are setting your kid up to fail. You are perpetuating a negative cycle. Little Johnny could be doing absolutely brilliantly, but because he knows mom hates teachers, doesn't support the school, and couldn't give a monkeys about his results, why would he hasn't developed any sort of, I almost just swore then, he hasn't developed any sort of internal motivation or valuing the purpose of this. He hasn't managed to accept that every grade you get opens another door. And just because you don't like it now at 15 doesn't mean you might not be grateful for it at 35. Like, he hasn't got any of those messages because you were so absorbed in your own 15-year-old misery, and you've projected that onto your kids, that now we're in this cycle, and there's no hope in hell for the teachers to get little Johnny out of it. We might be able to get a handful of kids every year out of that. We might be able to reach them, and we do, and it is incredibly rewarding, and it's wonderful when that happens, but we cannot drag every single student out of those negative cycles that these parents put them in.
So, I mean, do we need to go out and teach the parents how to potty train? Does there need to be
nice?
I mean, who teaches the teachers that teach the teachers? I mean, who teaches the parents who teach the children? And when you have resistance to learning, and I know what you're saying, Ray, when there's resistance to learning coming from the central source, then the children will resist the learning. And we're seeing that a lot more, which undermines us, because we're there to help facilitate learning and model learning. But we can only model so much. You have 195 days a year. We have the children for 6 hours a day. And when you have that, when someone says about controlling children or changing children's behavior, I might see a child 2 hours a week for 38 weeks in a year. So what actual outcome do I have in modification or even instruction? And that's the problem, is that we have society, the internet, and you see that with these gang wars stuff going on, how quickly, I mean, I could tell children not to be racist. I can tell children not to be misogynist. I can do the best Holocaust lessons I've ever done, where I can get emotion, and then know that those children go home and get on a computer, and everything I've just done is completely undermined because the parents have no controls, no command and control over their children. And therefore, I am just basically urinating in the wind, to use it, since we're on toilet training. And that's the problem. But the second thing is organization, structure, and routines.
Yeah.
And potty training, I think, is a wider issue of children not having. And you said about COVID, you're absolutely right. Our children don't sleep. They don't have structured routines. They don't have organization. They are living absolute chaotic lives. They cannot come into school and regulate because their lives are dysregulated. So you connect that to a lot of the issues of the mental health issues and the presented issues that we're dealing with. It's because those children don't have structure, routine, organization, discipline. They're living absolutely out of suitcases sometimes. And yes, some of it can be explained by the cost of living crisis. Some of it can be explained by poverty and backgrounds. And that's why, you have to be careful about not overjudging, because there are some people genuinely trying their best and everything sets against them. And I'd say if government did want to do something, and the evidence does prove this, the Sure Start centres were an absolute godsend for some of those parents who genuinely struggled, who genuinely need help. And to be compassionate with them, maybe we need to help those that are helping the children. And maybe that's where we can't do everything. We need the assistance from the local authorities. Because what tends to happen is we tend to get the outcome where the child is broken in many ways, and we're expected to fix it in school. And we can't do that. Go back to the early years stuff. So if you had serious educational policy, it should be targeting children at the very earliest age. And I don't think the likes of NHS do. And I can tell you so many experience of that as a parent, that you're kind of left to your own devices these days. And what's missing that used to be there is the community. Yeah. So there isn't the same community to help parents. There isn't the same support in the community that there is to help parents. And I think some parents actually hide these things because maybe they don't know what they're doing. And maybe it's not fair to have a go at them. And I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a parent who's struggling, who genuinely may be struggling themselves. And that becomes generational. And then they expect school to rescue it. So I think the Sure Start centres and all those, as you said earlier on, about government help schemes that need to help, but there also needs to be buy-in. It's all very well, because the problem is, I go back to what I said, if you turn to parents and say, here's a service that's going to help you, would they abuse and take advantage of that, or would they be grateful for it? Because there's such a culture now that whenever something's done for people, it's just assumed. Whereas I come from a generation where when people helped you, you were grateful. And I often find myself saying to myself, where do we get any appreciation whatsoever? I'm sure after this, we'll have lots of those individuals that will condemn us and criticize us. You know what I'll say to them? Get your ass in the class and see how long you last. Because when you're constantly criticized and you're the person trying to help that child, and you're the one genuinely saying, I can see the pattern. I've done 22 years of teaching. I can see how children are going to end up where they're going to end up, because you can literally see that behavior playing out. And you think, I'm trying to help you to help yourself. But the problem is we just don't get that support. We get criticized for helping children. And that means sometimes being honest and radical character. And being honest these days can get you into trouble, because it's easier to go along and say, just accept it, fighting it, standing up to it, holding the line on it. And that's a teacher and said, I'm not potty training. I wonder would they have a conversation by their senior manager and saying, don't rock the boat. That parent's complaint, just do what we're asking, make the complaint go away. There's such a complaint culture that the one group of people that can't complain is us.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't, if I were a primary teacher and that was never part of my job description, and it doesn't work like this, right? It's been gradual, but theoretically, if I never had to do that and that wasn't what I signed up for and that wasn't ever part of my job, and then suddenly I had to change a bunch of nappies, I would be saying no. And if they said yes, I would be leaving. And I've been a TA. I was a TA for a boy on the autistic spectrum, and I changed his nappies multiple times a day when he was at preschool many years ago. And that was my job. That was his need. That was a special scenario. I was at that school to help him, specifically to do that, amongst other things. Absolutely fine. I miss that kid. But I would never, as a mainstream teacher, ever do what they're being asked to do, because that is not what I would be there for. There's no way.
Absolutely. It's just another example of here's another job for you to do. And one that you absolutely, as an educated person who has trained to be a teacher, it's not on your remit. It was never part of your training, and it shouldn't. And there's a whole reason behind that, because this is not a teacher job, it's a parent job. I think as well, as you were saying about the Sure Start centres and things like that, there are parents who, in their defence, genuinely could do with being taught how to potty train their children, because there is I guess a bit of a culture as well of oh, I don't know how to do it, so I'm going to leave it, and I don't want to ask anyone because then I'll look like I don't know what I'm doing. Whereas I think, these classes non-judgmentally were in place to help parents who didn't know. When I was thinking of having a family, I was terrified by the things I didn't know, and I would have to ask about them. And I think that some parents genuinely do. And I think we've got to separate, as you say, the kids who need it because it's part of their need package, and kids who shouldn't need it but seem to need it because they haven't been taught how to do it. And economics comes into it in some ways. But I would defend again that in years gone by, and certainly my own experience, not having a lot of money and that kind of thing shouldn't obstruct your ability to be taught how to use a toilet.
Because it hasn't for years. Generations.
There is a certain amount of argument on the periphery of this about diet, about over-processed food and constipation and kids and their toilet habits generally, and health and well-being being an economic issue. Maybe there's that in there in the mix. And also, as we've mentioned with COVID, there is psychological developmental issues that are on the wider base of this, but this should be the exception, not nearly half the kids coming into school not toilet trained.
Agreed.
I would agree with. Here comes one of my bingo cards. Look, I grew up in a relatively impoverished background, and the parents were, manual workers and a housewife. But my mother would have absolutely been unbelievably ashamed.
Totally.
We weren't well turned out, how we were dressed, and Sunday best. We were best foot forward, how we spoke. How we acted. My mum, very good, very famous quote. You might be working class, son, but doesn't mean you don't have to have class. And And that is what I was taught by my parents. Now, some of the lessons my parents taught me, I don't want to teach my own children.
Yeah.
And that evolves, especially over, acts of physical punishment and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I forgive my parents for that, because that was the context of the time, and that was the social context. I got caned at school. So I had a very strict upbringing, and some of it was damaging, not going to lie to you. But some of it was defining character and resilience and stoicism, and was also about, boundaries, consequences, and maybe too many consequences. I'd like to know what year, I'm trying to figure out what year, in my life was probably we were at the best place. And I think it was probably the early 2000s that we still had some sort of boundaries and structures. But I think the advent of social media, 2008, smartphones, the taking off of the internet, and that's where I think a lot of our problems have really stemmed from. And I think the anthropologists and social scientists in the future will look back probably 2008, 2010, that banking crisis. And that's for me when things started to turn, and people started to turn. And then all of a sudden now everybody's right. Everybody's an expert. You saw it during COVID, PhD, the Karens who are a PhD in this, that, the other. And I think there was more resistance to people like us who actually have, qualifications and know like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We were describing Maslow's hierarchy of needs earlier on about what a child needs. And the most important thing a child needs is love, care, attention. It's not the physical stuff in the sense of money. They actually, believe it or not, some of the richest children I teach don't come from the richest backgrounds, but they're rich in community, and they're rich in that. And the grandparents, and in fact, I have to say, massive shout out to some of the grandparents at the moment, because they're pulling a shift. And actually, in some ways, honestly speaking, some of the grandparents are the ones doing some of the best parenting.
Yep.
And they're the rescuing factors for some families. And you see that in schools where don't ring mum, ring grandmother, and you're going directly to the parent. And I've seen that, and maybe because they have experience themselves, different generation, but we're seeing that a lot more. And again, you said earlier on about COVID, we lost that layer, didn't we, during COVID, with grandparents couldn't see their grandchildren. And I did notice a difference there. So it takes what do they say? It takes a community to raise a child, doesn't it? And maybe we don't have the same communities there, and that's one of the other legacy issues. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, do you think that there is a certain amount of parents who very much believe that kids will get there in their own sweet time and they shouldn't push for these things? Because there's a big kind of like, oh no, very unstructured. I don't want him to learn. He's going to learn purely through play. He will start to read when he starts to read, like some great organic experience of we'll just plonk him in this environment and eventually he'll learn in his own time to use the toilet when he's ready. Whereas I think generationally, when we were younger, it was very much, as I said, you will not go to school until you've learnt to use the bathroom.
So those entitled parents are stupid, because they don't understand how children learn, when they are best placed to learn, and how their brains actually work. And did I say one or A? Anyway, to be entitled and selfish, because they're making their wackadoodle parenting decisions everyone else's problem. And they are foisting their children into these situations like school, where everyone has to go, unless you home educate. But for some reason, they don't always. Like, if you have that mindset, wouldn't you just keep the kid in your house? Anyway, they send them to school, and then it becomes everybody else's problem. Staff have to spend hours of their day catering to something a kid should already know how to do, and ignore the entire rest of the class. Everyone has to change their schedule and the way they do X, Y, and Z, because little Johnny prefers to do things this way, because mommy's told him he's the center of the universe and no one can tell him what to do. It's stupidity, and it's arrogance, entitlement, and just sheer selfishness. Can we move on topic before I say something that's going to get
no, it's fine. I finished off this. You do also have the opposite. You have the other parent who's kind of like, well, my child was writing, writing their first symphony with like Mozart. My child was potty trained when they were 16 months, and they were potty trained multiple ways, So you do get the other parent who's kind of like, reading up and going like, and they're the ones that actually like, well, according to the layers of psychological development, my child has been potty trained well ahead of the advancement, and on the curve of potty training, my child is here. Oh, look, and some parents can be very competitive.
That's I was looking at.
My children were well potty trained before they were two.
I was looking at Catherine Ryan, who obviously famously has potty trained, decided her children would be potty trained by one. She was like, as soon as that child can physically sit up, I plonk it on the potty every time they have something to eat. And part of me is like, ha, superwoman. But part of me, I mean, I spoke to my mum about this as well because she's a health visitor, and she was like, I think around, 18 months is probably when you might start. Catherine Ryan was like 6 months, child on the potty, doing it. You're like,
the
crikey.
thing is, the weird thing is with children, there is no science, and it is true. There is some element of truth always with things like that. There is some element of truth that children do develop at different rates. And some children develop fast with some things, and others, I was apparently talking at 9 months and never shut up. I haven't shut up since. So, well, exactly. But that in other ways, I wasn't. So I had one child who crawled backwards, one that walked funny. And that's the thing is children do develop in different ways. Even in the same household, you see that with siblings. There was some nature and nurture thing going on. But that doesn't give you the excuse to turn around and go, oh, my child is, you need to challenge and push. There's that kind of comfortable area of going, you can actually push your child. You can sometimes. This idea of, oh, I won't make them uncomfortable. The same as the fussy eaters stuff. I mean, I don't get it. I mean, if you're hungry, you eat. I mean, there are children in the world who have no food, and often mine go, I don't like that. I'm like, well, I'm not making you another dinner. You don't like it, then fine. Your tummy's going to tell you to eat it. And I think too often we're killing the kids with kindness. We're overdoing it and giving excuse. And it's the excuse culture, isn't it? It's the excuse culture of my child's not potty trained because here we go. Rather than just my child's not potty trained because I didn't push hard enough and I probably don't know what I'm doing here and I don't want to make a mistake. And there is that, I think, confidence in parenting, and maybe some don't have that confidence, and maybe they don't know how to sort of push, I suppose. Yeah.
I like the idea of a child writing a symphony but still pooping his pants. It's like, is it a choice?
Well, that can happen, can't it? I mean, because
indeed,
that can happen, of course, because we know that some children are way advanced in some ways and some aren't, and that you have to allow for that. But we can all agree, we'll leave it with this, won't we? We can all agree that 40% of children, 1 or 2% of children go to school potty trained because they've got some issues. Absolutely fine. We can all compassionately say that's fine. And I'd say any teacher, if they know a child's got genuine issues, they would say, okay, we understand that. When you get to 40% of the population, come on, give your head a wobble. I think we can leave it with 40%, and then 40% becomes 50%, and then becomes like, what, the one child who is potty trained is kind of like, well, wow, you're the one child in class who's potty trained, and the teacher's going, well, it's okay. And you can actually get a school going, it's okay, you don't need to potty train your child. In other words, we'll just give up. We'll just say, hey, look, school potty trains your children now, and parents will go, oh, don't worry, I won't potty train my child because they'll potty train them when they get to school. And that's at 40%, you're getting close to a tipping point, aren't you, really?
Yeah, really, really are.
Yeah. Okay, so our second topic for secondary school teachers, we're going to look at rote learning. Who wants to start on that one?
Well, when I was reading up on this morning, I was thinking from an English teacher perspective that my bugbear is, what is the value of learning quotations? Kids at the moment are spending so long stuffing their brains with quotations, whereas I think obviously there is an advantage to knowing a few key quotations because you can pull them out in an exam. It saves you time. You're not rifling through the book. But I think that the emphasis on memorizing stuff is skewed. I don't think it is what really shows that someone is engaged or understood the nuances of a text or the context in which it was written. So if this was kind of extended from maths equations and physics equations to open book again for English exams, I would celebrate that.
I have mixed feelings on it. So things like, for example, the poetry. So we teach AQA, Lang and Lit for GCSE, and I have never understood why comparing poems is even a part of this exam. Thanks, Ofqual. I will never understand it. But what I really, really hate is that they don't have them all in front of them. That the exam boards are only allowed to show them one of the two, and I just think what. Why? What is if you see the poem, poems are so visual. Yeah. Or some of them are anyway. And seeing
the way they're laid out on the page,
the way they're laid out, interesting. And there's so much that would jog your memory, and it doesn't. And the poetry is so stressful for students, and it shouldn't be, because they have to memorize stuff in English like they have to memorize stuff in history and science and every other subject. But for some reason, they have this real block about it, and I don't know why. But it's not even about that, because really they just need to get over it, because they have to memorize stuff for every subject. So like, deal. But it is a stress, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like, there's no reason why they should have to memorize quotations for all these 15 poems. Like, there's just literally no reason for it. The longer texts, I kind of get it, because they could waste so much exam time flipping through, as you said. And we used to see that in the days when they had open book. You'd see the kids looking. And they're just like, for God's sake, just come on. Because they hadn't revised enough, and they knew they had that as a fallback, and then they'd waste their exam time looking for things and not writing. So I'm torn when it comes to English. I can see that, and I think there's huge value in learning enough about text and the cultural capital of that, and being able to pull out a quote and looking clever and relating things in the world to specific literature quotes. I think there is a huge value, but I feel like there has to be limits. And the limit for me is the poetry, because they wouldn't be wasting any exam time. They wouldn't be flipping through an entire text. It would just be looking at the poem in front of them. For God's sake, let them have it. So for English, I'm like, mixed. But for maths and science, with the decision that they're not going to have to memorize certain formulas, I just think, okay, like these subjects have been complaining for ages about being so full of content, they don't have time to get through it. And this is what we're taking away? Like, is this supposed to, is not having to memorize quotations supposed to make up for the fact that these courses are overly full of content and teachers can't teach everything? Like, is this supposed to compensate for something? This isn't what anyone asked for. So I'm really confused about why this decision has been made, what anyone's supposed to gain from it, and how it's supposed to make any sort of positive difference.
I think for me, just to respond to what you're saying about English, I think for me it's always been more important that they memorize the knowledge as opposed to memorize the quotes. And I agree that we do have some kids who will sit and thumb through books. We've always taught it so that the book is there as an emergency, not as a whole. You're not going to do much with it in the exam. And I think the stress of having the book in the exam just alleviates a little bit. You're always going to get kids who won't revise, and you're always going to get kids who decide that because they've got the book they don't need to learn any quotations. But I think on the whole, the removal of the books entirely and the focus on learning quotations prior to the exam is just, it's all skewed. It's not the thing that we want to really examine. And I agree. All the courses are really full. I mean, teaching 2 GCSEs in English Lit and language over the time you have is really hard. And I remember listening to the Michael Gove interview on Teachers Talk Radio recently, and he was like, oh yeah, well, why don't you just for fun slip in another text? Michael?
Shut up.
There is
I'm
no
so angry about that.
There's no shoehorning or enough Vaseline in the world to squeeze anything else in. Do you know what I mean?
No.
That's the point I was going to make, is that we have some of the most examined children. And I mean, I studied 8 GCSEs. Kids now, and this goes back to league tables, this goes back to games being played, this goes back to overdoing it. And it's quality, not quantity, it should be. So I like quotations. I did quotations in my A-level politics. I can still tell you 250 quotations from Marx to J.S. Mill to thing. And maybe it sounds as if I can do my best Boris Johnson, because that's one of the things that politicians end up doing is they quote, and I still love my Machiavelli. And I remember reading Machiavelli, The Prince, when I was 17. It was seminal. And I still quote, some Machiavelli. And quotes are good. Quotes give you a depth. And the problem is, go back to your Govian interview, is I think he decided that he wanted more, but forgot that you can't, more doesn't mean better.
Yeah.
Sometimes more means less. And in less, it is about, I love the fact that my child has just gone to the toilet. Are you? There you go. Toilet trained.
Hooray!
Told him. I said, don't interrupt. And they're just going, didn't even ask permission to go to the toilet. So I'm going to get into trouble for that. It's all right. Well, hey, fundamental human rights and all that. Anyway,
If
the
you could have
comment.
them quoting Machiavelli while going to the toilet, then that would be an absolute winner.
Oh, that would be, yeah. Fortune favors the brave, you know. Fortune
You're
favors
letting
the brave.
yourself down by them not quoting.
Yeah, fortune favors the brave.
While peeing.
I'm going to take a chance on an opportunity, and fortune favors the brave. And I like that. I like going deep in my knowledge. That's why I loved A levels rather than GCSEs, because A levels
Absolutely.
3 to 4 subjects, and you can really go deep. And I think we've got an extra layer there. I think we've got too many layers where we're just testing the children, and the kids themselves don't remember the knowledge because they can't retain it all. They are overloaded, but also I don't think they're given the skills to be able to. And I was given the time to actually study, and that's the problem now. Is we teachers again are doing too much for the children and are robbing them of the learning opportunities. So of course, giving them the quotes, no, they need to go off and find something that is earned, and something that is gained is more valuable than something that is given. And the children are given the knowledge far too much, and they're given far too much help sometimes, which robs them of the actual learning. And I think that comes again because the pressure put on about exam results, about doing everything we can to get these kids over the line, and that's not quality. And so I do think there is a need for quotations, there is a need for deeper learning, there is a need for retaining some knowledge. And you talk about the AI and everything else, and someone could say, well, they can find the knowledge. That's all right. How do they know the knowledge is actually good and accurate? So knowledge is important. It's a key part, but it's not the only thing. You have to have the skill on top of it. And we are just got far too many subjects to do, far too little time. And in generations gone by, our students were better students. So let's be honest. They're students. They don't study any longer. They surface study, and they don't go deep. And therefore, if we then turn around and try to rejig our education system and say we want kids to go deeper, we would have to then say we'd have to sacrifice some subjects, and would have to invest the time, and would have to also say we'd have to the children to invest more time in themselves. But the problem is they don't have the time according to them. But when I look on their mobile phone, I can say they spent 5 hours yesterday on TikTok and all the rest of it. When I get that with GCSE students going, oh, I've got all these things to do, I've got that to do, I can't do the homework tonight because I've not got the time. You know, seriously? You haven't got the time to study. What do you think? I didn't have those distractions. I had a Mega Drive, and we had 5 television channels. We had TV to watch. And when it comes down to it, again, back to parenting, my parents like, you're studying, son. And the routine and consistency. It's your time to go study. Do I have to? Yeah. And there you are in your bedroom, and your bedroom had basically nothing in it. Now, the problem is our students don't actually study any longer. So they can't do this. And the problem is, if we know that, then we have to come up with ways to better educate them. And I think I can understand the need of dropping it, but I think you're losing something when you do.
I think with what you're saying is really true. And I think as well, that's why the leap to A level often feels, huge, because at GCSE hoop jump, you learn by rote and hoop jump, and then you get to A level and you're asked to be critical, and you're asked to dig deeper and things like that. And I think students find that incredibly hard. And I agree, there's a lot of kind of spoon feeding to get them over the line, and not a lot of kind of like go and explore, go and be critical, go and weigh up different opinions, because absolutely there isn't time. You are literally like hammering home the content and hoping for the best.
Everything's messed up.
Toilet training and that.
But at the same time, a lot of the children are brilliant, and they cope with it, and they're very successful. And I think it's getting harder, but there are lots of success stories, and that comes down to, again, the character of some children, and again, a lot of parents who are navigating a minefield of a world these days. And it is really difficult as a modern parent, because you want the best for your children so much, and that leads to maybe snow plowing, where you sort of remove the barriers, and it comes from a well-intentioned place where you want so much for your child to do so well, and you care so much about them, that you're trying as much as possible to remove. And I'd say the same for us teachers, because I want my kids to do well, and sometimes we may overdo it, we may overhelp, we may try to give them everything we can, but then you realize that, again, the more you do, the more they expect, and then the more you do. I mean, I had that with when I ran an intervention session during last year's Easter holidays, and I said, look, there's a day I could do, and I had one parent then ring up and complain because the day I chosen didn't suit them. I'm like, hold on a second. I'm giving up a day of my free time, not paid. I'm buying the kids a pizza, by the way. They get a Domino's out of my own money. So, and I actually worked it out and says I've got 35 kids coming in over the Easter holidays. And history, because history is so much content. I am still teaching content right now. Anybody who teaches, I'm 2 years. A lot of schools do it over 3 years. And no matter how I do it, I have an overloaded curriculum. Absolutely too much content. And I have to then strategically choose which content and take that risk of what comes up, what doesn't come up. And I cannot blame the exam board for that. That's what they've been, that's what Mr. Gould and his agenda has created. And that's why I was glad there was pushback, especially from the, English, and what Liz pushed back on the Gove interview about we're the ones that have to implement this. And what I have then is I have to come in my own time. But I had a parent then say, oh, it's not fair. My child's losing out in this intervention session, of which then I had to remind them what this intervention session that I'm doing in my own time in the supposed holidays, that I'm giving potential time with my own children. And their first reaction is, it's not fair because I'm not. And should I just then make the universe revolve around your one child?
Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
Main character energy there.
Yeah. And to be fair to them, when they got back, when I sent the Sarky email back, they did come back and say, "Oh no, we're grateful for you putting on," and they caught on. But their first initial reaction was, and again, it goes back to my mantra: sometimes the more you do, the less you're thought of, and sometimes the more you do, the more the demand is there. And it goes. That's what the connection is. The two stories in that sense is that do too much, more is expected. And maybe that in previous generations, less was expected of teachers. And I think, how much easier it was in the 1970s and 80s to be a teacher. You did a lot less in some aspects. I mean, writing reports was a lot harder. But when you actually look now at what the job specification actually is, and yet, there's us giving up free time, how many unpaid hours. We had a good show about that. And we're swamped, aren't we? We're absolutely swamped.
Yeah.
So, we'll remind our sponsors. We are sponsored by Hatchet Learning, and that's our partnership that we have. The publisher professional development, should you have the time to professional development, which you can also get some professional development through Teachers Talk Radio. And they do group resources to support teaching and learning in schools around the world. Around the world, around the world. Around the world. Let's listen
Musical
to that.
Interlude.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're not sponsored by Daft Punk either, but there we go. Cultural reference, certain generation, you get it. Learning.com, where hopefully you'll find resources which can also keep you on track and not go off on tangents like me. So we've also got our Teachers Talk Connect CPD in Manchester, and that is next Saturday, the 14th of March, 9 a.m. And the tickets are free for that. And that's our Teachers Talk Connect CPD. You will have the great and the good of education, some of the best brains in education, all across different subjects. A fascinating day out, good networking opportunity, and some really fantastic CPD. Always brilliant to go to that. And of course, we are also sponsored by AQA, one of the premier exam boards, real experts in the classroom, and they help, obviously, help teachers in many ways to teach to specifications. So they use their assessments to create resources, tools, and training and guidance, and genuinely make a difference to the students to obviously get the grades that they need to get on to the next stage of their careers. It's UK's most chosen assessment organisation, and I'm sure you know all about AQA, so you can find out about what they do on their website as well. So there are sponsors: Hatchet Learning, Teacher Talk Radio, CPD Connect, and AQA Assessments.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no. Okay, if you're listening instead of watching, someone, thank you, John Gregory, has said, can JP's version of Around the World be the new jingle?
I think we should come with the Daft Punk helmets, you know what I mean? So you don't know which, that's what we should do, like Power Rangers. You don't know which Teacher Talk presenter it is, you know? And I like this, actually. Teachers can never do enough in the eyes of some parents. There has to be some accountability from parents to actually be parents and do their part too. I agree, and it's that relationship, but there has to be, and I think that's where we're missing that social contract. I mean, I try and support parents, understand parents, and try and help them to help their children, but I expect the same courtesy back. And it's like no worse than the email culture when you get an email from an angry parent and then you actually meet them at parents' evening, or you meet them face to face, and within 30 seconds, you're humanized. So there's a gap sometimes, a dehumanization, we have to be careful of that too as well, that there isn't a conflict. And some actually, I'm sure there are some watching this who are watching this because they want the conflict between parents and teachers and everything else. I don't. I'd rather work with parents, and if they're the parents we've got to work with, that's the parents we've got to work with. So maybe you have to go and educate them too. That's fine, but they make that part of our job specification. Let's go out into homes maybe and start teaching in the home. Fine, but when I am teaching and I am the expert, it'd be nice to be respected as an academic professional with 22 years experience and not be second guessed all the time and undermined by people with pop psychology, with degrees in know-allism and actually no experience in the classroom, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm more than welcome to take criticism, but I'll take criticism in Teachers Talk next week from the professionals who can evaluate and evidence what I do rather than just basically judge me on a snippet without actually making any whatsoever of the actual students I've taught, 2,500 of them. And I can tell you, after 2,500 children, I have never had one I've met out on society that hasn't thanked me for the job that we do. But that's what we do sometimes. We don't always get thanked. People don't always see that we do behind the scenes. But in the end, we know why we're doing what we're doing, and we're still in the game because it's important. Because the future of our children is important, the future of the country. And I just think people sometimes need to lay off and actually support us rather than piling into another group of people. Because if they keep doing that, they'll soon find that there'll be nobody changing their nappies. The children will have to change their home.
Yeah, agreed. Well, that was fun. Thank you for listening and watching and putting up with JP's Daft Punk cover.
Around the world,